Ladies and gentlemen, now we will begin session 2 of the dialogue, Regional Prosperity and Growth, Economic and Technology Ties. Please allow me to first introduce the moderator of the session and our speakers for this session. The moderator of this session is Ms. Kristy Xu. She is the director of the Taiwan-Asia Studies Center of Chung-Hua Institution for Economic Research. Our first speaker is Mr. Simon Wang, President and CEO of Taiwan External Trade Development Council, TAITRA. Our second speaker is Mr. Ajit Manocha, President and Chief Executive Officer of SEMI. Our third speaker is Dr. Roger Liu, Associate Professor of the Department of Social Sciences at Flem University. Our fourth speaker is Ms. Trisha Ray, Fellow and Deputy Director at the Center for Security, Strategy and Tech of Observer Research Foundation. And our fifth speaker is Ms. Antara Ghosal Singh, Fellow of the Strategic Studies Program of Observer Research Foundation. I'll now pass the floor to Ms. Kristy Xu.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to session 2. The title for this session is Regional Prosperity and Growth, Economic and Technology Ties. Very different from the very dark aspects and also very serious issues we discussed in previous session. I think we look forward to brighter future for Taiwan-India collaboration, both on trade, technology, as well as investment. I think that we all have noticed how significantly bilateral trade and investment has grown, but I would like to especially highlight the importance of technology, collaboration of technology between two countries, because we think that technology collaboration has actually extended to a very important new area that includes space technology, for example, and also that includes an EV, for example, and also a very important sector, which is the semiconductor industry. So I think we will have very fruitful discussion in this session. And we are also very lucky that we have a very balanced presentation of scholars and speakers in this session. We have two speakers with trade and industry background, who is Mr. Simon Wang from Taiwan's most important trade promotion agency, the TAITRA. We also have Mr. Ajit Manocha. He's the president and CEO of SEMI. Globally, the headquarters not for only for India, and also we also have a bonus because right beside him is Mr. Terry Tao. Terry Tao, he is the president of SEMI Taiwan. So we have a very distinguished speaker and expert in this very important sector. We have also three experts on international politics and strategic study and also security. And they are Roger Liu, my friend, and also Dr. Trisha Ray, and also Antara Singh, and the ladies are from the ORF. So I think we'll give each speaker 7 minutes, so we will have more time for a Q&A and interaction. I believe that we will have very excited discussion because these are actually the most important and most significantly something we can feel the collaboration that we have in the past few years. So without further ado, I would like to invite Simon to speak first. Simon.
Thank you, Kristy. Dear speakers from Taiwan and India, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of Taiwan External Trade Development Council, briefly TAITRA, I'm very pleased to be invited by Taiwan-Asia Exchange Foundation and Observer Research Foundation, to join in 2 years annual dialogue on the session of regional prosperity and growth, economic and technology ties. As you are aware that India and Taiwan have long benefited from a balanced and ever-growing relationship, not only across various sectors such as trade and investment, science and technology, education and culture, but also in people-to-people exchanges. From economic and trade aspects, from Taiwan's point of view, I would like to lay out 3 highs to elaborate the progress and why Taiwanese companies should weigh in on India to include into their strategic maps for their global operations. First high is high growth. India's GDP growth, the latest one at Q2 this year, has climbed at 13.5%. And this year's GDP growth is predicted to shine at R.O.C. admired 7.4%. Of course, the recent estimate would be a little bit lower, but still very high. According to Taiwan's customs statistics, bilateral trade between Taiwan and India reached at $7.7 billion in 2021, growing by 60.5%. It's very high. And in the first 8 months of this year, in 2022, bilateral trade volume amounted to $3.5 billion, growing by 20%. So last year, very high with 60%, and this year, first 8 months, on top of 60%, another 20%. So you know, the growing speed is shining. Since the outbreak of pandemic from 2020 to July 2022, Taiwan has invested in India with 123 cases, which totaled accumulated investment values at $1.21 billion. And between 2020 to July 2022, investment values from Taiwan to India amounted to $433 million. And what does it mean? It means it represents 1/3 of our investment to India in 21st century. And top 3 investment sectors are electronic components, ICT products, chemical and plastic products and materials. The second high is high potentials. You are very much aware of recently India has overtaken UK as the world's 5th largest economy. And in 2030, India is very likely to be ranked as the world's 3rd largest economy. And India is a powerhouse of technology, particularly in software engineering, which powers all kinds of ICT hardware and services. And India has world's admired, highly talented technicians and software engineers. And in manufacturing industry today, India is going to mark a milestone by starting to make high-end smartphone, iPhone 14, by Taiwan's company Foxconn for its Pro model and Pro Max models. And Google's Pixel phone will also be manufactured in India with its 20% of production volumes as a target. And the third high is high time. Since 2014, Make in India's policy has been implemented in India with an objective of 25% of GDP coming from manufacturing sector targeted in 2030. And many of the incentive policies have been launched to draw foreign direct investment, such as PRI's production-linked incentives, phased manufacturing program, Semicon India program, and so on and so forth. So we see a determined Indian government with strong will, and India's consistent policies assure foreign investors to commit in making India in a longer perspectives. And with geopolitics development in recent years, and companies pursuing for globalization to minimize cost, to maximize production efficiency to just-in-time supply chain strategy, instead have started to shift focus to nearshoring, time to market, just-in-case strategy, and recognized migration of production bases have become overriding concerns. And India, therefore, has been looked upon as one of the necessary choices of production lines to build or to migrate to. Today, 3/4 it means 75% of global EMS, electronic manufacturing service, production values are controlled by Taiwanese companies. And Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing is widely welcomed by democratic countries which tend to own an autonomous supply chain, including India, where 1/4 of imported electronic components are semiconductor chips. So it's high time Taiwan and India further strengthen binding and ties in industry cooperation. Okay, to wrap up with my 3 highs. Number 1, economy-wise, India has high economic growth, bilateral trade and investment between Taiwan and India also are moving into a high level with high growth. Number 2, India has high potentials in economic aspects and manufacturing aspects. Number 3, it's high time India cast a democratic and robust supply chain which will serve companies from democratic camp in order to secure a resilient supply chain. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. That is indeed a very timely, comprehensive picture of what we have reached several milestones in the past few years. And you also mentioned 3 highs. So we have 3 M's, right? And 3 T, right? And this session we cover 2 T's, trade and technology. And now we have 3 highs. So I think we'll come back to you because the relocation of supply chain from a China-centered operation base is actually one of the most opportunity we can take to further enhance Taiwan-Indian collaboration. So we're not talking only about trade or investment. We are actually talking about forging a supply chain partnership that is most important for both countries. So I think we will have time to go back to that issues. Now, can I have the honor to invite our second speaker, Mr. Ajit, to give your remarks, please.
Thank you for the invitation. And yesterday I made few remarks at the Yushan Forum, and I felt pretty lonely. But today I can build upon Simon's comments, and I don't feel lonely at all, because my thoughts will be connecting what Simon said. First, Chairman Michael made a comment this morning that he talked about the old, that the person that Mr. Tian doesn't like to be called old. Personally, I take pride in being old here, because, no, you are much younger than I am. The reason I've said this, because I started this industry 42 years ago when this industry, semiconductor industry, was in infancy stages. The revenue was like about $10 billion in 1980 when I started in Bell Labs. And I was the research scientist, like a propeller on the head kind of thing. And the Bell Labs challenge was make 1 patent a day. And my objective was to really do a lot of research and make more patents. And then, of course, I got into management, and then Philips CEO in Philips Semiconductor, NXP, then Global Foundry CEO. And I retired twice, and then I joined SEMI 6 years ago. And again, this is an important comment that I'm making. I saw how this industry has started. I saw the rise and fall of many countries, like Japan in 80s. They were rising, Japan, and then fall of Japan. I saw the rise of Taiwan. I was personally part of the journey of the TSMC and UMC in Taiwan. This is probably my 110th trip to Taiwan. So I've been coming, I witnessed all these startups in TSMC and so on. Of course, Philips owned 30% of TSMC, and I was part of Philips at that time. I've seen the rise and fall and re-rise of Korea. I've seen rise of Taiwan, and of course, rise, fall, and re-rise of US also. So there's a message in my telling all this, because we're going to talk about India. We cannot afford India to rise and fall and then rise again. We want to make sure this partnership brings the lessons, what we learned from the journey that I have, so that India and Taiwan and SAMI as an industry association can provide the playbooks so that this partnership will provide a jump start, that get the ball rolling on the very first day of India's new ambition on hardware. So also the SAMI is not just an association where we only do some kind of white paper. We actually run multiple initiatives to deal with the tough challenges that the industry has. If you talk about the challenge of climate change, no independent individual company can solve the climate change challenge. No government can independently solve the challenge of climate. Nobody even knows how to do it. Everybody knows what we want to do, but nobody knows how to do it. SAMI is playing a big role of bringing the best of the best brains together and coming up with the roadmap, the solutions, and enabling solutions. That's one big problem, and this is a problem for the entire world, and SAMI is playing a very central role there. Second challenge, which we didn't talk about in this room, is the cybersecurity. We talk about national security, but the next big danger for all of us in this world is the cybersecurity. Now, I don't openly talk about the various countries and who is the bad animals here, but this is another problem. A lot of G2G involvement with the business communities, industries have to happen. So in my professional journey, I have dealt with many governments, because in the semiconductor industry, compared to the other industries, which is hardware manufacturing, mostly screwdriver assembly, even the iPhones and so on, semiconductor industry is much more complex. There's a B2B as well as a lot of G2G role. Participation is very critical. Otherwise, this industry will never succeed in India. We talk about India. So the role of G2G is super important. I had the honor to work with President Tsai many times since I come to Taiwan. And we had quite a few discussions about cybersecurities and how SAMI, along with the industry colleagues, is trying to address this cybersecurity. Semiconductor industry is also part of the problem, but also part of the solution. And we are focused, SAMI is focused on part of the solution. So the other issue we talked about, everybody knows supply chain issues. Supply chain issues are so big that everybody is affected. The philosophy of supply chain was just in time, but that doesn't work anymore. Now it's a just in case. Now just in case means more cost, but the cost of disruption is much more than going from just in time to just in case. And the reason for just in time not working is the rise of the geopolitical issues. Geopolitical issues are going through the roof, and they're rising. Even just day before yesterday, US came up with more export restrictions for China. Okay, fine. I mean, government has to do, politicians have to do what they have to do, but we have to make sure the industry is not going on a stalemate. So our objective of SAMI is to take the industry voice and work with the governments to advise them how to devise their policies so that the business continues and the industry grows, innovation continues. That's the role we play. So I was heavily involved with the Obama's government. I was on multiple committees, and I'm again getting involved with the Biden's administration. I work very closely with EU, several meetings every year with EU, METI in Japan, MOTI in Korea, and like-minded countries, we work. Now, what do I bring from those experiences? The playbooks. Playbooks on how to deal with certain challenges. So that's the kind of information that SAMI brings at the table to shortcut the kind of reinventing the wheels kind of behavior. Now, we talked about India and Taiwan. So India and Taiwan, if you look at, we talked about India is the world capital of software. And Taiwan is the world capital of manufacturing hardware. No question about that. But going forward, hardware and software have to be together. Especially, I don't think anybody talked about the word AI. AI is going to become the major game changer for hardware to become better and more effective. And for AI to be more effective, you need a lot of software. So that's really a great foundation for the partnership of India and Taiwan. Without that, we'll all fail. Not just India and Taiwan, the whole world will fail. The whole ecosystem will fail. So I think there is a strong foundation. In fact, Ashwini ji said, Sani said the other day, we should have the marriage of these two. And I think we should actually do a symbolic marriage next time. And I think technology is the glue. Like children become the glue for the parents, so this technology will be the glue of this partnership between India and Taiwan, and also India and like-minded countries on technology. That's the vision that I have. Now, we talked about think tanks. Now, yes, there are geopolitical think tanks and economic think tanks. SEMI has multiple think tanks with multiple people from all kind of phases of life, from geopolitical, geoeconomical, academia, industry, and so on. I think this is the time to expand those think tanks with the talent in India and talent in Taiwan. Now, Taiwan is already involved with us, with SEMI, and I think it's time for India to get involved. I've been talking to IITs in Delhi and MIT also, that we need to really strengthen these think tanks and expand these think tanks. That actually gives you a lot more incentives for how to promote innovation in the country. Now, the other challenge for this industry and where Taiwan and India can strengthen together is talent. And that's another T which nobody talked about, so you can add one more T, talent. Now, talent, India produces the best of the best graduates in the world, but they are green talent, and if we bring those talent with some structural program to Taiwan and to other countries, of course, also, and train them, and so that when they go to India, they have a kickstart and not kind of learn on the job and take a long time to start. So that's why I mentioned the rise and fall of many countries happened because things didn't work, whether G2G relationship did not strengthen properly, or there was some not expertise. Now, of course, we know the neighboring country here, they will import people and offer a lot of incentives, and that's how they kept on rising. But not every country can do that. We need to find a structured approach. SEMI has started a very comprehensive program on talent development, from elementary schools to the community colleges to the universities. And one thing which I did not mention yesterday, we actually have formed another network of association, the academia, called American Semiconductor Academy. They have the 200-some networks of universities and colleges with semiconductor curricula, and SEMI has 2,600 companies members worldwide, who are bringing the industry context into academic program. And imagine those students when they graduate, they will be ready to roll the very first day, not get 6 months on the job training and then learn. We need that because why is it so important? If you talk about setting up a screwdriver assembly factory, the investment will be few $100 million or what. But this semiconductor industry, wafer fabs, we're talking about $10+ billion for one small fab. And besides the infrastructure like the power and water, if the factory doesn't work for even 1 minute, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of loss. So we need to have the right kind of talent, which will be making them. So yesterday I met with one of the chairman of a very, very large company in Taiwan, and who has expressed interest to set up a fab in India. And that was the discussion. How do you make sure that India, when you start your operation in India, is successful and first time right and every time right? And I have had multiple fabs in my career, and of course, I learned a lot from TSMC. and other companies as well. It's not simple, but this partnership will provide that kind of a playbook so that India is successful, but again, it has to be some, in return, a benefit for Taiwan. So the last thing I want to say is about the think tanks. It has become now reality that because of the pandemic, people have realized that semiconductor industry is important for national security, cyber security, and economic security and prosperity. That's the title of this session also. And that's why most countries are starting to declare semiconductor very strategic for their country. And so did India. So, of course, for Taiwan, it's very clear. President Tsai declared semiconductor strategic industry in 2019. I was in the meeting with her at that time. So, because this is important for the national economic security and prosperity. Why I say this? If the industry is going to grow from $550 billion last year to $1.3 trillion in the next 10 years, it's going to bring a lot of wealth. It's going to create a lot of employment. I feel that there is a shortage of roughly 3 to 4 million talent in next 10 years for this industry. 3 to 4 million talent. US alone, there is today 80,000 unfilled jobs. Next 4 years, 5 years, they need almost 750,000 people in US. But where do you find them? Not easy. They don't exist. STEM education is not very popular in US and Western world. And STEM education in Asian countries is very popular, but the number of children to couple has gone down from 2+ to 1.3. So I think this is another G2G role, as well as executives and the business people like us to play a role to support more STEM education population and STEM education growth. And the think tanks also realizing that there is the role of technology is so important. So the CSIS, which is the largest think tank in Washington, D.C., I had multiple meetings with them. They want to see how we work together. Because once you bring the technology context into the discussion, your thinking about the geopolitical issues that you're doing will change. Because you will start thinking differently. Because national security, cyber security, economic security, that will come into play in a thinking of what we're discussing, are there unintended consequences of that? That's the part missing in the general thinking of most of the think tanks. Because technological role is very, very critical, and that's where I see that SEMI sitting here, I think it makes a lot of sense now, and also more discussion with the existing think tanks and SEMI. I think we can bring a lot of value in enriching the societal and the economic benefits for the world. With that, I'll say thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I really learned a lot because I think the semiconductor industry has become so strategically important that almost every major nation in the world has crafted certain strategy or policy to address stable supply of semiconductors. And also, Simon just mentioned that FASTCOM, you're talking about FASTCOM, right? FASTCOM has it's already on paper everywhere, so on newspaper everywhere. So FASTCOM has committed to fabricate 28 nanometer chips in India for automobile sector. I think Indian government is still anxious to have more companies in Taiwan to help India to produce more chips, not only for its own use, but also for international market. So I think we can further discuss how India is one of the most potential destination for Taiwan's semiconductor industry when they have a going out strategy, and how government can work together to make that happen. I think it's really something important, and it really takes place. I believe Indian-Taiwan economic partnership will be stronger, much stronger than it is now, though we have already a lot of progress. So I think this, thank you very much, and also offering a lot of resources that SEMI can provide to Taiwan and to India. Thank you very much. We'll now come to our third speaker, Professor Roger Liu. He's Associate Professor of International Politics at the Department of Social Science at Flem University in India. So please, Roger.
Thank you, Kristy. Well, I have been staying in India, and this year is the 8th year. So if you are staying in the country for a long time enough, well, you will become immune about all the rosy pictures that people are talking about every year. We are talking about almost the same thing, and so suddenly you start to wonder why it is not still happening. So as Kristy has mentioned, well, this panel is going to be addressed more on the brilliant side, the bright side. But I'm going to bring this back to the dark side, maybe. I want to share some things that I have observed from within this the 80 years that I have been working with different stakeholders or players inside of that. So I'm a political scientist. So in this panel, I feel like a black sheep here. But I'm honored to hear a lot of insights that you have shared over here. And I think we are now celebrating the increase of investments in EMS or ICT industries. Well, that's a good thing, but for the recent years, under policies such as Make in India or production-linked initiatives, we can see there's a huge growing in the EMS or ICT investments. For example, they have tried to relocate their supply chain to India to produce not only the older generation of iPhones, but the new generations like iPhone 14. And a lot of suppliers such as Foxconn, Wistron, and Pegatron has followed their steps and relocate their manufacturing base to different states like Tamil Nadu or Karnataka. That's a good thing, but we should not forget that other than EMS or EMS/ICT, there are a lot of so-called traditional manufacturing business. They are still interested in India, and these are the people that we also have to focus upon. And according to the research done by JICA, they found that almost 50% of the Japanese companies started to, break even after 5 years. So that means if you are a small and medium business, it is almost like committed suicide if you want to invest in India. You need support from the government. But the government-to-government dialogue between India and Taiwan, actually, I see a lot of problems inside of that. I have to make a disclaimer. I'm not speaking for the government because I'm a civilian. But, I have some contact with them, so I have some of my observations. So I think now I want to share some of the problems or issues that I have observed in the manufacturing business, especially in India. First, we see generally speaking, the manufacturing base in India is generally weak. It is still generally weak because according to the statistics, the output of India's manufacturing sector between the year 2020 and 2021, it also only accounts for 74% of its GDP, compared with China's 26.18%. So generally speaking, the manufacturing base in India is still generally weak. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that there is a lack of complete ecosystem of supply chains in India. So, which means that, now we see that the EMS/ICT business has been relocating their supply chains inside of India, but it's relatively limited still. For the traditional manufacturing business, it's not still yet. So it has to be addressed. And the second issue is that the Indian supply chains has very high hidden cost. According to a study by Arthur D. Little and CII in 2020, we see that generally the hidden cost in the Indian supply chain is still very high, and that will be a hindrance for other industries to move their manufacturing base into India. And another issue that I would like to address is that policy-wise, Indian government has issued a lot of policies, under the big project like IPOI that have been mentioned by other panelists over here. According to IPOI, a lot of special economic zones will be built especially something called the Coastal Economic Unit that will follow a big project called Sagamala, which is part of the IPOI, the maritime development. But this kind of thing actually has faced a lot of local oppositions, and this has to be addressed by the government, intergovernmental talks. But however, what we can see between the two governments, especially on economic cooperation, is that we see two levels. The first level is ICT business. We see big business like Foxconn or big manufacturers, they approach the Indian government directly. So actually they are working really effectively in this kind of business to government dialogue. So this part works really well. However, when it comes to the government-to-government talks between Taiwan and India, well, this become handicapped, paralyzed, and we see a lot of hindrance over there. And this part actually has been influenced by politics, we have to admit. I think generally speaking, although we have some mechanisms being established between the Indian and Taiwan governments, for example, the Taiwan desk has been established at the central governmental level. However, for a lot of issues regarding especially manufacturing business, education, and technology development, still we need more coordination, we need more understanding, we need more communication between the two governments, which is yet to happen, because what happens on the ground is actually, one example that I would like to share here is that TCC needs 3 different positions to fill up for different sections. However, because of some unknown visa issues, these 3 positions was never happening over there. And people don't know why under the general, favorable structures that China and India was in a confrontational status, well, the bilateral relations between Taiwan and India is not increasing because of that. So something strange is happening here. I think we will need more dialogue between the two governments to make it happen. So do I run out of time? Okay. I think some things that we can think about other than the IPOI or some multilateral arrangements is that how India can help or assist Taiwan to participate in a more meaningful way in this multilateral arrangements. For example, well, under IPOI, Australia and India actually has some educational scholarship programs. Well, is it going to happen between Taiwan and India? Well, India has followed its one China policy, and this can be a major hindrance that Taiwan will not appear on India's radar according to this. So I think there are a lot of things that we can think about under this cooperation. But the point is that we need more intergovernmental dialogue and coordination and understanding of each other's situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us a different aspect of the bilateral relation. Just to complement on what Roger has mentioned, though bilateral trade has increased significantly, as mentioned by Simon, actually it only accounts about 1% of Taiwan's total trade. So we still have a long way to go. And the FDI going to India has also increased significantly, led by these large ICT and electronic companies like Foxconn, Pegatron, establishing their operation bases in India. But if you compare that number, I think it's less than 2 billion. Accumulated FDI is less than 2 billion. But if you compare that with Vietnam's, our investment going to Vietnam, which is around 60 billion, I think there's another issue that we should address. So I thank Roger for bringing that up, for bringing that issues up. I hope that we can have time to address that later. Now I'll turn to fourth speaker, lady from India, Trisha Ray, Trisha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kristy, and I just want to, at the outset, thank the Taiwan-Asia Exchange Foundation for being such gracious hosts and for facilitating these amazing series of conversations. It has been a great learning experience. So I'll be focusing my intervention on something that Mr. Manocha also touched upon, which I'm thankful for because I thought the transition would be very awkward, so this is a useful departure point. I'll be focusing on cybersecurity. And this links to something Digital Minister Tang called digital resilience for all. Because cybersecurity is an enabler for not just like core security issues, but it's an enabler for international competitiveness on digital services and digital-led economic growth. It's a pretty crucial factor there. And it'll be fundamental for both Digital India as well as Digi-Taiwan. The Indo-Pacific region in the year between 2020 and 2021 witnessed a 168% increase in cyber attacks, with malicious actors targeting critical sectors such as utilities, internet service providers, healthcare providers, and financial services. Instances of cyber espionage also escalated dramatically at this time. For instance, hackers sponsored by North Korea and Russia targeted vaccine researchers based in Canada, France, India, South Korea, and the United States. India is one of the most cyber-attacked countries in Asia. That has been an unfortunate trend over the last few years, as is Taiwan. And these threats are increasingly linked to geopolitical trends. As we know, during Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan earlier this year, the volume of cyber attacks reached 15,000 gigabits, which is apparently the highest in Taiwan's history. And Taiwan also faced coordinated disinformation campaigns that sought to demoralize the people of Taiwan. Similarly, in India in 2020, as clashes between Indian and Chinese forces escalated at the border in Galwan, a Chinese advanced persistent threat group, Red Echo, hacked into India's electricity supply, control systems, and power plants and installed malware, which was triggered in the coming weeks, leading to blackouts in the city of Mumbai. And this included hospitals, where the hospitals had to rely on emergency power supply to keep the ventilators of COVID patients on. So cybersecurity is not just, like I said, about security, but about our daily lives, the resilience of essential systems like health, banking, telecommunications, and electricity, and it is also pertinent to individuals and industries that rely on this infrastructure. Another area of concern, rising concern in relation to cybersecurity is China's Digital Silk Road initiative. It has supported the expansion of Chinese technology companies ranging from cloud service providers, internet service providers, telecommunications infrastructure, surveillance technologies. And it has become a rising threat, not just in India's neighborhood, but beyond as well. Taipei and New Delhi both have acknowledged the security implications of having Chinese vendors, for example, in our 5G networks. Now, sovereignty is a fundamental tenet of international relations, but the massive strategic and economic benefits that some state and non-state actors sponsored by states gain from destabilizing operations has made finding a global consensus on clear and enforceable rules on what responsible behavior in cyberspace entails. It has made this process very difficult. So how do we respond? I want to highlight briefly India's comments on the initial draft of the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Cyber's report in 2020, where it said that territorial jurisdiction and sovereignty are losing relevance in contemporary cyberspace discourse. It is important, therefore, to recommend a new form of sovereignty, which should be based on individual ownership of data, irrespective of where it is physically located. This, in some ways, echoes what Digital Minister Tang said yesterday, which is that no country can be a digital island in this connected world, and that digital governance needs to, at its core, be individual and human-centered. So it is clear that India and Taiwan have much in common, not just because of the threats that we face, which are many, but also because of how we see fundamental rights in cyberspace. Unfortunately, our spaces for multilateral collaboration are fairly limited. The UN OEWG or UNGG are not going to be possible forums for collaboration, unfortunately. But there is potential in bilateral engagement. For example, the computer emergency response teams of Taiwan and India could engage in exercises or information sharing on regional threat groups. The second area, really quickly because I'm aware that my time's up, could be a dialogue on data and privacy. So Her Excellency Vivian Redding yesterday had mentioned the joint declaration on privacy and protection of personal data that both India and Taiwan are signatories to. We can also further build on these common principles through bilateral engagement, and there's a lot more flexibility in a roundtable or TRAP 1.5 formats to continue this engagement. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Trisha. Can I now invite Antara to speak? Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be a part of this important discussion today. My co-panelists have already extensively covered various opportunities for cooperation between India and Taiwan, particularly in the economic and technological space, including trade, investment, and also collaboration in semiconductor industry, among others. It is very encouraging to see the kind of enthusiasm, the positive energy on either side to advance cooperation and collaboration between each other. However, even as our two sides seem all set to explore newer possibilities or opportunities in our bilateral ties, I think we cannot but ignore the elephant in the room, that is how this evolving relationship is being viewed from Beijing, what could be its possible reactions, and to what extent we need to consider the Beijing factor while advancing mutually beneficial cooperation between India and Taiwan. As rightly pointed out by various speakers today, as well as yesterday, that India-Taiwan relations have a rationale of its own, a logic of its own, and it does not target or is directed at any third party. And I completely agree to this statement. However, as a China watcher, I often see that this budding relationship between India and Taiwan has been ruffling quite a few feathers in Beijing, and has evolved as a major talking point among Chinese strategists in recent months. What I would like to add to today's discussion is some interesting perspectives on India-Taiwan cooperation that is coming out of Beijing, and I hope it will add some new perspective, a new dimension to our discussions. What I gather from the writings of Chinese strategists is that Beijing's approach towards Taiwan's new southbound policy is rather negative. They consider it a policy to obstruct the cross-strait economic and trade integration. The fact that Taiwan has rejected BRI and came up with its own policy to develop its own economy on its own terms is somewhat disliked in Beijing policy circles. Further, what annoys the Chinese side most is the new southbound policy's emphasis or focus on India. The discourse that I see in Beijing is that India and Taiwan can be a good combination, you know. Both have like trust deficit with China, both wants to reduce their economic dependence on China. India's deep antagonism towards China sort of strengthens Taiwan's stance, while Taiwan's complicated ties with Beijing gives India a certain kind of leverage with, over Beijing. Other than that, Chinese analysts also acknowledge that India and Taiwan do have complementary economic and trade structure. Like Taiwan has capital and technology, while India has market as well as human resource advantage. Also, the new southbound policy of the Taiwanese government and India's own reform policies like Made in India, like industrial development corridors, like smart city, digital India, they all are somewhat synergistic in nature. It is true that currently India-Taiwan ties are still quite sluggish, but Chinese observers also acknowledge the potential for cooperation between the two sides, and the narrative is that it's only a matter of time that both sides would like to realize the full potential of India-Taiwan relationship. China is therefore, it maintains a very high degree of vigilance against what it calls substantive collaboration between India and Taiwan. So what exactly comes under the substantive collaboration? For example, in the realm of politics, it keeps a close eye on official exchanges between Taiwan and India. It is important to note that even as our honorable member of parliament and also former government officials are here in Taiwan as a part of this delegation, the spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in India yesterday issued an advisory asking India to stop all sorts of, official exchanges with Taiwan. Secondly, Ambassador Bambawale mentioned about Taiwan office, an additional office in Mumbai, but I read that China has been lobbying very hard to ensure that other than Delhi and Chennai, Taiwan doesn't get an opportunity to set up more offices in India. In the economic space, China has been keenly watching the FTA process, the FTA discussions between India and Taiwan. And it is seeing if India further intensifies efforts to attract investments from Taiwan by setting up industrial parks and other arrangements for Taiwanese enterprises, and if Taiwan can reciprocate in similar terms by opening up for Indian labor force. The other important area for India-Taiwan cooperation that often figures in Chinese discussions is in the realm of space cooperation. Will India-Taiwan scientific research cooperation be expanded in the area of space research? Will India play a role in Taiwanese satellite launches? These are some of the questions that are being discussed among Chinese strategists. In military and security field, Ambassador Lamba mentioned about intelligence, not intelligence, but information sharing between India and Taiwan. But I see that, these are, it is one of the areas, others being military attaché exchange or training for military officers or, information or intelligence sharing between India and Taiwan, particularly on the naval domain, are some of the areas that China is actually very sensitive about, and they want to guard against it vehemently. Secondly, there is a lot of concern within Chinese side about collision of Tibetan and Taiwanese-related issues. There's a feeling among Chinese strategists that Tibetans in exile in India and Tibetans in Taiwan might be collaborating to improve India-Taiwan ties. And thirdly, there are apprehensions in China that the US and Japan factor might act as an external influencing force driving India-Taiwan relations. For example, despite the popular discourse that India does not have the right business environment or investment environment, Japan has a long history of successfully investing and operating in India, and many Chinese strategists believe that there is actually no reason why Taiwan would not like to replicate that kind of a Japanese experience in India. So in the last few years, Chinese strategy has been to kind of restrict Taiwanese businesses only towards China, while preventing them from competing with Chinese, Chinese capital in other markets like India. The original idea in China has been to get both Taiwan and India on board its Belt and Road strategy to make them part of a China-centered economic and industrial chain. However, I think that idea not quite materializing as of now. China is increasingly taking a more hardline stance against both India and Taiwan, which means that the disputed border as well as the Taiwan Strait might continue to remain turbulent in days to come. So I would like to conclude that, as we discuss bilateral cooperation between India and Taiwan, even in the economic and technology space, we cannot simply wish away, the China factor. We must brace up for some strong countermeasures from the Chinese side. And probably India and Taiwan would need to brainstorm together, to work together on how better to deal with the China challenge while we deepen our mutually beneficial cooperation, even in economic and technological space. So I'll stop at that, and thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. I negotiate with the organizers, so we still have some time for probably 1 or 2 questions before we move to session 3. I think 5 speakers provide very insightful and also very important points with regards to a bilateral relation between Taiwan and India, and also the barriers or the potential barriers or potential, difficulties for going further. I think we have to take a more balanced approach to handle the opportunities as well as the challenges, so that we can still move forward. I personally was the project overseer for Taiwan-India FTA feasibility study about 10 years ago. I mean, it will turn to its 10th anniversary after we complete the study, but because of a China factor, we can't move any further. So I personally feel that China is actually one of the most important challenges for our bilateral relations. So we have to face that too. So I'll invite 1 or 2 questions, and then we can have a quick response from the speakers. Can I first invite our Indian friend, Ambassador? And then
thank you, Kristy. I'll be very short. It's not a question. I think this should be a suggestion or a recommendation emanating from this group. It is very important to have a big industrial project of Taiwan and India which succeeds. And now we have such a project, the Foxconn Vedanta project. And everyone in Taiwan and India, not just governments, but also civil society, to the extent they can, should work to making this project a success. And if it succeeds, tons of Taiwanese investment is going to flow into India, and I think some Indian investment will also flow into China. So I think this should be a recommendation from this group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think 3 years ago, we wouldn't imagine that TSMC would invest fabrication in the US too, right? So we have to be more patient and don't get too frustrated, Roger. So I'll have Dr. Lai to ask for the second question, and then we'll have we can start with the Anne because she's the she will have the first question, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, thank you. I think the one probably can answer in the next session, but I still like to ask that since people talk about FTA, and I noticed recently India has actually revived its interest in FTA in several of the FTA conclusions with the UAE and other Gulf countries. So that I'm just interested in about the revitalizing the Taiwan-India FTA discussions, because earlier there was the recognition that India was a little bit hesitant, but right now it seems that the Indian government has reversed the attitude. I do not know how that will filter into the Taiwan-India relationship. And second thing is about asking the question regarding to our esteemed Professor Ajit Manocha. How do you think about the recent discussion about the possible chip oversupply? Whether that's a short-term phenomenon or it's going to be a long-term that determine factors, because that could affect the overall Taiwan-India when we talk about semiconductor cooperations. And also the issues related with that is that recently the United States come out with the Chip 4 alliances. Of course, right now Korea is still very hesitant. But how will India think about this Chip 4 alliances, and how would that impact by India its own strategies? And also in terms of the Korea, it seems that in terms of the chip competition, Taiwan, Japan, and the United States, we sort of complement each other, but Taiwan and Korea, we are competing against each other. So how would India look at Korea's role in your industry development? And finally, I just some comment about Foxconn. Although the Foxconn, in terms of the measure itself, seems to be huge, but in Taiwan, at least in my view, we never consider Foxconn as the representative of the Taiwan industry. There are so many of the Foxconn, the record in the past, whether that's in Brazil, Indonesia, and also earlier in India, about $5 billion investment never materialized. And also, the Terry Guo, his promised investment in Wisconsin, that became a big joke. And that become a big issue in terms of Taiwan-U.S. relationship. So I think the Foxconn, you need to be aware of that, and also need to be aware that the Foxconn investment, actually Foxconn did not come out with its own portion of the money in that significant number. Many of the money finance came from Indian side. And Foxconn is actually looking at the EV car, electric vehicles, and the possibility, so that be aware of which company and what kind of technology Foxconn want to bring into, because this is the issue that the Foxconn is looking at for the future development, as I know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Xiao, can you keep your question? No, 我们请那个肖老师，因为他还没。Can you keep your question in 30 minutes?
Yes, 30 seconds, I
30
think.
seconds. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. My question is actually very related to Dr. Lai's question, just to also for Mr. Ajit. There has been skepticism about whether semiconductor industry can really be decoupled, supply chain can really be decoupled in this region. And so the Chip 4 that United States initiated, is it going to be an alternative mechanisms, or is it to this continuing sort of decoupling? Is it practical, and is it feasible? So that was my question. Thank you.
Can I invite Mr. Ajit to respond first, and then we will have some time probably for India's FTA policy.
I can probably respond to a couple of questions that regarding the oversupply and when this will happen. First of all, I look at the fundamentals of our semiconductor industry are super strong. As I mentioned that the doubling in 10 years, what happened in 60 years. Now, yes, we are not immune to the economic conditions today. The economic downturn is really on everybody's mind. Inflation is rising everywhere. The Russia-Ukraine war is only adding fuel into the fire because of the energy crisis and so on. So yes, there will be some softening here and there, which will actually readjust the supply shortage because of the economic conditions. And I've seen we have all heard the results of Micron and AMD recently. So there is going to be some correction, but fundamental problem of supply chain, which is fragmented, are not going to be solved easily unless there is more manufacturing comes. Now, I didn't mention this in my remarks yesterday or today. As we speak, there have been an announcement of 90-some new fabs in the world coming up in next 4 years. Out of 90, 30 or 40, I don't believe, but 50, 60 will still happen. That's unprecedented. So the demand is there. The timing may be not 10 years in a double, maybe 15 years. Yes, we'll see some ups and downs. So it's going to happen. Now, my thinking is this, if the Russia-Ukraine war continues for next several months, then we may even enter into recession. That will also maybe solve the problem temporarily, but in the end, we need a lot of devices, a lot more silicon, so there's need for all these factories. So second question about chips 4. I know that there is some concerns from South Korea, there is some concerns with Taiwan also. Now, SEMI's role is to really don't actually ever question politician or politics. We don't talk about politics, but we only talk about policies. All this chips 4 announcement has not been really vetted well with the industry voice. So the policies, and this is what I mentioned with Dr. Sai a couple of days ago, my view is that there has not been good thinking about the strategic alignment on what we want to accomplish and what are the unintended consequences. That thought process has not gone in. So this is the way SEMI will approach, is give advice to all the 4 countries involved in the chips 4 to kind of go into follow-up discussion with certain tips from the playbook that SEMI has developed. So again, I don't want to go too much detail into that, but I had the discussion with Dr. Sai. My plan is to have that discussion with the White House and Department of Commerce next week, and of course with Japan in December. So yes, those are, in my view, I will say one thing, since it's not on the recording, that US cannot bully anybody. We have to work together as a like-minded and equal footing with a level playing field to work together. There's a need for 4 countries to work together. Because you look at the semiconductor hubs, these are the hubs: Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and US. We need to work together. But at the same time, I heard a lot of comments about China. We cannot provoke China so much because we are so dependent on China today. And if we create more provocation like this, we'll only create more disruption in supply chain, and it will bring all of us on our knees. So we need to think about the unintended consequences of provoking China too fast without thinking, without having the strategic alignment of the major countries that we're talking about here. So that's really my biggest concerns about the chips 4. Last on the Foxconn, I will not comment upon why Foxconn didn't kept his promise on Wisconsin and so on. But to me, it looks more genuine this time. Their commitment is because there is a need for more semiconductor business. And India is the right country to go to. India finally has announced the right strategy, right policy, and I think there's a lot of ingredients of success in India. Talent, we all know that. I mean, they do have the ecosystem and infrastructure of many other things which can support the semiconductor manufacturing. Now, but it will be a not easy start, and the comment that Gautam made about first time right and the getting success is exactly the right way to think about. If Foxconn project, I mean, this is multi-billion-dollar investment. You cannot take it for granted that, okay, I'm getting 50% from the government, so be it if I'm a little bit delayed. That's not going to work. So SEMI will play a big role to provide the playbook on how various countries have done the right way in the first time. That's what I brought about the rise and fall of many countries in the past. So we want to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes again. So SAMI will play a role, and as you said, Kristy said the right way in summary, that SAMI will provide some solutions to the problems. And so I think the rest of the questions are more in the domain of the geopolitical topics. I'll let my colleagues answer those.
I think thank you very much for that answer. It's really important for us to better understand SAMI's role and also how the overall industry are thinking about. I think we can go to the FTA question. Probably next session we'll have time to revisit that because time is really up. So I want to thank all the speakers for this session, and please join me in thanking them. Thank you very much.